I speak in the name of Creator, Redeemer and Sustainer. Amen. It's really important that we remember significant events in our lives and in our history, because in some ways they shape who we are and the world in which we live. It's rather sad that we've not been able to celebrate many birthdays and anniversaries over the last few months because of the lockdown. And me and Les are particularly sad because we would have liked to have celebrated our big O's with you. But I'm sure as the lockdown, when it's lifted, we'll be able to come together and celebrate all these anniversaries and birthdays together. It is important that we mark significant events, and today and over this weekend we mark the significant event of VE Day, Victory in Europe 75 years ago. Of course, there were many events planned for this weekend that could not happen, and as part of that preparation, Jane Payne, who's the treasurer at St Botolph's, was collecting people's stories of VE Day, their memories of that day and the celebrations that took place. And as part of that process, she's even took the story of her own father, Oliver. He remembers the fact that when everyone here was celebrating victory in Europe, that the war continued in the Pacific against the Japanese. And on the 8th of May, which is the date of the anniversary, people were still dying. And it wasn't until August that year that war fully ended, when the Japanese surrendered. His story reminded me of my encounter with the people from the Burma Style. When I was in Coventry serving in my first parish, I was approached by the veterans of the Burma Style, who asked me to be their chaplain. I was very taken aback. I was young and didn't have any real experience of war. But they'd come and listen to me preach on several occasions, and they felt that I was the right person to be their chaplain. And in response to that, they gave me a badge which I had sewn on my preaching scarf. And if I say I had it sewn over my heart, it shows you how significant that was to me. The times that I spent with them, the memories that they shared with me, will carry on forming the part of my life and my memories in the time to come. I was always very moved by their sacrifice and their commitment that allowed us to have freedom in this country. So VE Day is a celebration of peace, but it also marks commitment and sacrifice. In the Gospel today, we hear of another story of commitment and sacrifice. Jesus has died, he's risen from the dead. He's instructed his disciples to proclaim the good news of the gospel. But they're in an environment of fear and intimidation. Stephen, whose story we hear of today, decides he will not be silenced. He goes around and tells people about Jesus' life, the miracles, his teachings, his death and his resurrection. He preaches the good news of Jesus Christ, and he's arrested and stoned to death to be silenced. And yet his message continues even to today. He made the ultimate sacrifice. It's hard to imagine being in an environment where you can't talk about your faith, where you can't share your views about your faith. And yet even today in many countries, if you speak about your faith to others, you could be arrested and you could be killed. In fact, in Coventry, we had many refugees who came to us from other countries because they could not practice their Christian faith. And as we remember VE Day today, we remember that at the time of the war, there were many people who lost their lives, particularly the Jewish people, during the war because of their faith. But we also remember that there were people who spoke out about the war and the Nazi regime. And one of the significant figures that we remember is Bonhoeffer, who spoke against the Nazis, and it cost him his life, and he was a Christian. So many Christians spoke out against what was happening and paid the ultimate sacrifice with their lives. Commitment and sacrifice. This is at the heart of what we do if we want to make a difference in the world. We're all challenged at different times in our lives to make a difference. In the other story that we heard today, Jesus is with his disciples and he's trying to prepare them for his death. He's trying to tell them that they need to remember him, to remember his words, his actions, and his life, and to remember the fact that death is not an end, and that he will return through the resurrection and stay with them through the Holy Spirit. But as the disciples listen to him speaking to them, they find it hard to understand what he's saying. In many ways, their ears are closed to him. Their lives are small, their vision is small. They can only see their only concerns and fears. They can't see the bigger picture. Jesus is trying to give them the encouragement that they will need when he dies and rises from the dead, and he's asked them to follow him and to witness to the gospel, and maybe to pay the ultimate price in sacrifice. But like many of us, confronted with such issues, we can't always respond straight away. And yet ultimately the disciples do. After the resurrection, they make a commitment to the gospel, and they sometimes paid with their lives. It's important for us to remember momentous occasions that have shaped our lives. We're going through a momentous time at this moment. Who would have imagined what would have been happening now? We're almost put on a war footing. In fact, the language of war is used now. There's not a place in our world that's not been affected by this pandemic. There are people that we know or who know of people who have been affected by the virus. And sadly, so many thousands and thousands of people have lost their lives. This pandemic has touched each one of our lives, directly or indirectly. And we live in momentous times. Never before since the war have we experienced this sort of feeling, where our travel has been restricted, where there's been food shortages, where there's been a change in the way we've had to live our lives because of the environment that we live in. Only during wars do we normally experience these things. It's brought out the best in people, and it's brought out the worst in people. So I wonder, what will you remember from this time? This is a momentous time in our history. It will go down as a mark in history, the year of the great pandemic and how it affected the whole world. So how will you remember? I think I will try and remember how it brought out the best in people, how it brought out acts of service and kindness and generosity and love. I hope to be able to feel that that will continue after this pandemic stops. I would ask you, what will you remember after this time? And how will you make a positive difference through your memories and experience of this time? Amen.